Hello, BookTube. I went out yesterday morning to the shop up the street, as I like to do, to get the Sunday New York Times, and I talked with the shop owner, and we laughed. We had a good joke. He remembers me now because I'm a good customer, and he's a good shop owner. so it's a wonderful relationship. It's an extra reason why I want to go up there, which is exactly what it should be. A thing that I think is largely forgotten in the 21st century, but there have been times, usually I read the Sunday New York Times and then I talk about it. I bloviate here on this channel. There have been times recently where I haven't wanted to do that, where I've been sure that I knew what the whole thing was going to be about or what it wasn't going to be about, and I was willing to skip the Sunday Times book review, the pull-out book review section, which is the pinnacle of my profession, in order to skip the heartache of the rest of the paper. I'm trying to avoid heartache and agita as much as possible when it comes to the news. That is largely not possible, and I think it was a realization of that fact that sent me up the street to the shop anyway. That plus I wanted to see how the owner was doing, so I got the paper, I brought it back here, and I made some breakfast, and I read the whole thing front to back, every line, and then I did a library tour, and I did a couple of read-alongs, and my read-alongs are in a state of upheaval, because they're of course novels, and I'm not reading any. I don't want to read any fiction in the month of November unless I'm being paid to. Deadline stuff, commissioned stuff, but otherwise no. I want nothing but November, nothing but nonfiction November, just to get in the swing of that grand old BookTube event, Nonfiction November. And by the time I was done with those things, with periodic rests and cuddling with the bean, it was late in the day, and I was losing the light, and I'd completely forgotten about doing a Sunday rant with the Times. But I didn't want to let it go to waste, so I thought that right now we would do a shorter video in which we talk about literally yesterday's news, in which we talk about the Sunday Times on Monday morning. It'll make for an easier video because I won't be quite as jazzed up to fulminate about the non-bookish parts of the paper, like, for instance, the front page of the New York Times. Royally irritated me yesterday. Royally. There's a big photo of a super hottie at a protest, at a Brexit protest in London. There's a front page feature, a very fun front page feature about the TikTok app that the kids like so much, and how students, teachers in high schools are encouraging it, because it emphasizes creativity. There's an article about the vast amounts of money that the Trump re-election campaign is spending on social media, where it won the last election, influencing the minds of what the American media insists on referring to as low information voters. Like we were talking about some sort of inherited Romanov anemia. You are not low information accidentally. You are surrounded by information. You are low information by choice. So low information seems to me to be yet another of America's pernicious euphemisms for ignorant. You are surrounded all day long by information about this subject. Surrounded by it. So you're not low information in the same sense that you're low testosterone. You're not a low T voter. You're ignorant. You're an ignorant voter. Low information almost sounds like something that you could say about yourself without much more than a self-deprecating smile. I'd love to vote in favor of my own self-interest, but I'm going to vote against my own self-interest because I'm kind of low information. No, choose a word that people who are that word won't like using about themselves. Use the word ignorant. But what isn't on this front page anywhere on the highest profile, highest value news real estate anywhere in the world? What isn't on this front page is that a couple of days ago, Mick Mulvaney, the acting chief of staff for Donald Trump's White House, confessed to high crimes and misdemeanors at a press conference, with cameras rolling. In absolutely no uncertain terms, he said, that's why we held up military aid, because we wanted a foreign country to intervene in our election. That is in the Constitution. That specific thing is what the writers of the Constitution were thinking about when they thought about high crimes and impeachable misdemeanors. That specific thing is what they were talking about. And the acting White House chief of staff, with the full acknowledgement of his boss, confessed to it on live TV. Now, that was a couple of days ago. You might think that's not front page news. The only reason you don't think that's not front page news is because you have become massively desensitized in the age of Donald Trump. You have become massively desensitized to the fact that that is still news. That should not only still be on the front page of the paper, it should still be getting 4-inch banner headlines. And instead, you in the front page of the paper from yesterday, you have to turn all the way to page 19 to get a picture of Mick Mulvaney and quid pro quo in the headline of the article. And I was thinking, okay, well, I'm outraged that you have to wait to page 19. 90% of your readers aren't going to go that far, but at least you're doing it. But no, I was wrong. No, instead, it was a fun TikTok-style article about where that phrase quid pro quo comes from. It's Latin, but where does it come from? Isn't that fun? Isn't that a fun thing to think about? Huh? But there were, we'll only look at one other thing. There was one other thing here that, not in the front page, not in the political part, and God, don't even get me started on the op-eds. The opinion section was unbelievable. Just unbelievable. But when you get to the arts and leisure section, there's a two-page color spread on HBO's new Watchmen series. I think it's a 12-part miniseries or something like that. That is adapted, of course, from the 1980s graphic novel, the 1980s miniseries and graphic novel by Alan Moore. One of the greatest comic book graphic novels of them all. Just if you have The Watchmen and you haven't read it, you must go do that. If you've never heard of The Watchmen, you must go do that. And also, whether you read comics or not, you should read The Watchmen. It came out at the same time as Frank Miller's Dark Knight Returns. It came out at the same time as Mouse by Art Spiegelman. You should read all of these things, including The Watchmen. And The Watchmen tells I've mentioned it on this channel, I'm sure I've talked about it many times. It tells a discrete story, tells it beautifully. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. It has a tiny little epilogue. It should not have spawned any kind of sequels or prequels, and there have been both. In comics, there was a before Watchmen series that was largely regrettable. The artwork almost all throughout was beautiful, but the concepts behind it, Alan Moore is totally insane. As you know, all of the dogs in his backyard are barking. He has no blue M&Ms in his bag, but when he serially disavows these things, as he does, he's within his rights to do so. He created a finished thing. And I'm not saying that, no one can ever do anything with that finished thing again. Of course, I'm not saying that, but the problem with all of these knockoffs and spin-offs and whatnot is that they are more or less canon because Alan Moore doesn't own The Watchmen. DC Comics owns The Watchmen. And they can do whatever they want with it. And they have. They have done many, many regrettable things with it. They did before Watchmen. And right now they're doing, it's a 12-issue miniseries that's been going on for the last 16 years called Doomsday Clock, where apparently all of the editors in the DC offices are like Leto in God Emperor of Doom. Apparently all of those editors are in the late stage transformation into a sandworm and don't have legs. I'm assuming that's the only reason why Doomsday Clock has been delayed for 16 years, is that the editors don't have legs. So they can't walk to the writer's office and say, if this miniseries isn't done next month, you're fired. And you'll never work at DC Comics again. It's not you're fired from this miniseries. Your name goes on a short list, and that list is etched in stone. You will never work for one of the major of the two comic book companies in the world ever again. And the editors could then add, if they could only get to that guy's office, but they don't have legs. They are becoming Shai Hulud. But if they could get to that guy's office, they could say, and also the editorial world is a small club, and I can make sure you don't work at Marvel Comics either. This is absurd. Finish this miniseries and do it on time, or I'll take you to court to get the money back that we paid you. But since the editors are apparently all of them transforming into sandworms, they can't walk to the guy's office and do that. So I think maybe Doomsday Clock might have a 12th and final issue scheduled for sometime in the next 2 years. But one way or another, Doomsday Clock itself is the outcrop of another bad Watchmen-related decision on the part of DC Comics, which is to take the dystopian superhero universe that in which the Watchmen is set and make it part of the DC universe, make it part of the Justice League universe, so so that Dr. Manhattan, the gigantic superpowered being in the Watchmen, is suddenly in the same universe as Superman. Rorschach, this character, the trench coat wearing psychopath, is in the same universe as Batman and can fight Batman. A horrible, horrible decision. What is the reason for that? Just because the Watchmen is one of your most popular commodities? Anyway, the Watchmen had a movie adaptation, and I liked it. I thought it was quite effective. And now it has a miniseries on HBO. And I got a screener with the first couple of episodes, and I wanted to wait, as I usually do. I knew what the premiere date was for Watchmen. It was this Sunday. It was yesterday. So I waited until then to watch the first couple of episodes, just to be in on the buzz, to be up on the surprise and whatnot. And it really confused me. It didn't entertain me at all, even for a minute, which was not true, of the Watchmen movie. The Watchmen movie entertained me from beginning to end. I recognized immediately the choices it was making about how it had to be different from the comic book. The comic book is enormously elaborate, and you can't do that in a movie. I thought the movie did everything that it could do as a movie just wonderfully. And it never confused me. It never had me saying, well, why is this even called The Watchmen? And this series did. It very much did confuse me. And it didn't entertain me at all. I don't know what will go on here. I don't know. I'm actually a little bit behind the news because I don't know what Alan Moore might have to say about this thing. I'm sure someone has sent him the same electronic screener that I got sent. And if I were him and the Watchmen were my production, I wouldn't be able to resist popping it in and watching it, clicking on it. I imagine that he will disavow it. And in this case, I would understand it even more than some of the other Watchmen-related stuff, because I don't recognize... It seemed to me the first... Maybe the whole arc is different, certainly with the original miniseries, the comic book miniseries of The Watchmen. I got the first three or four of those issues on a metal spinner rack at a drugstore. They just had them. The guy who runs the shop knew nothing about comic books. It used to be you could get comic books anywhere, and on that metal spinner rack you had, I didn't know what they were, and there was issue 1, 2, 3, and 4. He just hadn't sent back the older issues, or maybe there was no program to send them back. One way or another, they were all there, so I bought them all. And even those 4 issues give you no hint of the enormously complex, overarching arc of the Watchmen once it's over. So maybe this miniseries will be the same thing, but the miniseries is entirely about Black Lives Matter. I don't know how that's even connected with the world of the Watchmen or anything about what it has. It's entirely a racial drama, and I thought it was well filmed, but it very much had me thinking the same thing that a lot of the before Watchmen comics had me thinking, which is, why is this called Watchmen? Aside from a couple of things in it, why is this called this? It has nothing to do not only with the concept of the original, but with the ethos of the original. So we shall see. I'm unless I get more screeners, I would never in a million years pay money to watch this thing or go out of my way to find it. And I don't follow that rule as often as I should. That rule of waiting until release date, because there are a couple of things that are not yet out that I have screeners for, that I have watched that that I have really liked. The new Kingsman movie, for instance, with Ralph Fiennes, the one that's set in World War I, is incredibly good. It's just incredibly good. And there's another movie also set in World War I. It's called 1917. It's obvious Oscar bait, along with Midway. These two are obvious Oscar bait. But 1917 I thought was terrific. Just terrific. Totally involving. I have a screener for Midway, which is another one of these gigantic special effects historical extravaganzas, and I haven't watched it yet because I know it's going to annoy me, and it's going to annoy me for the smallest possible reason. In this case, literally. The shortest person on the cast of Midway, by about a solid foot, is Nick Jonas. And Nick Jonas was part of the Jonas Brothers, and he is an overwhelming tobacco addict. He is the kind of tobacco addict where I call them guild navigators, because it's not even useful to point anymore to how much he consumes. It's that it is his world. He can't live without it for any prolonged length of time. A couple of scenes in a movie, like in Jumanji, if they're heavily jump cut, because he can only go about 7 or 8 minutes, or he starts to undergo potentially lethal withdrawal. And tobacco addicts like him are always the reason that he's 4'9" is because he's been smoking since he was 8. And the tobacco addicts like him always have an arc. The ones that are famous, the ones that are in the entertainment industry, they go from hiding it to tacitly admitting it. In other words, you never filmed doing it, but you allow an interviewer for Interview Magazine or Premiere or wherever to mention that you were doing it while you were talking to them, but only in words, not in pictures. And then you do a couple of artsy-fartsy culture or wardrobe ads for, Dolce & Gabbana or something like that, and you're smoking in those ads so that you have some layer of deniability. You could say, well, it was just for a photo shoot. And then you might do it in the B movie, the sort of extras for a DVD, or you might do it in a movie that you don't expect to have wide distribution. But the key for Guild Navigator tobacco addicts is that they want the whole world, they want to validate their addiction. They know how hopelessly trapped they are. They know that they're dying. They can feel it every morning. You can feel that you're dying, but they can't stop, and they know they can't stop. So what they want to do is go the other way and have everyone say that this is good. And the main thing that they do, especially actors, will be that they will go to their agent and say, not find me a good script, but find me a script in which I can smoke on camera. Keanu Reeves did the same thing and told his agent, and then told Premiere Magazine, this was really important to me. That was an important part of my decision to take this role. And that is why, of course, why Nick Jonas would be in a World War II movie. and that's going to bug me, and I know that it is. And I don't know, unless his character is brutally killed somewhere in that flak fighting, I think it's probably going to stay bothering me throughout the whole movie. And that's ridiculous because, it's a major thing. It's a huge budget for this thing, and I'm going to be curious to know. I don't think the screener that I have probably has finished effects, so I'm probably not missing all that much. But there's going to be a void. These big special effects Palooza war movies are going to fill a void for me, because I don't think I'm going to really care to watch superhero movies after Avengers Endgame. Avengers Endgame felt like an ending to me. In a very real way, it did. And I mean, you've got these two cinematic universes. The Marvel Cinematic Universe, which built for 20 movies to a conclusion in Avengers Endgame. And then you have the DC Cinematic Universe, which had many misfires and a few real hits, and now has apparently gone the route of letting directors do sort of art house versions of whatever they want without having a coherent cinematic universe. And that'll probably lead to some interesting movies, but I like DC characters mainly for their traditional appeal. So it's not going to have any appeal. It's not going to have any appeal for me. So I think I might be kind of done with superhero movies, except the odd, rare exception. Which means I got to have some sort of special effects Palooza to fill the void. So it'll be that. It'll probably I'll probably shift to TV. I kind of want to ask my my Hollywood friend for a screener for his Dark Materials. I was, like everybody else, gravely disappointed by the movie. I might like to see this elaborate miniseries, and of course, I will get, as soon as it's available, I will get some sort of screener for the Lord of the Rings, for the miniseries Lord of the Rings, or the ongoing series Lord of the Rings. But anyway, I said that skipping the front part of the paper was going to leave us more time for the book review, and then I bloviate. We are now at the book review. The New York Times book review. This is a Sunday book review, and the lead item is Self-Portrait in Black and White by Thomas Chatterton Williams, which I don't think on its own, it's from W.W. Norton, where they're one of my favorite publishers, but on its own, it's just a race polemic. And we have seen dozens of those in the last since 2016. Can't imagine why. I think the reason this one's on the cover is not so much for the book as for the reviewer. The reviewer is Andrew Solomon, who's a big deal. But I thought his review of the book was really sensitive, really interesting. Almost made me want to get the book. I don't think I even have an advance copy of it. And then there's a new and noteworthy section at the beginning, and in this case it's poetry, but at the bottom of the new and noteworthy section there's always a paragraph on what we're reading right now. And it's they just farm it out to anybody on staff who's going to do it. And this time around, it's Ben Brantley, who's a theater critic. And he writes about Dickens. I love Charles Dickens, the fatness of the novels, the aptness and unexpectedness of their metaphor, the fire of their indignation. At the moment, I'm sinking back into the firm but voluptuous armchair that is Dombey and Son. And I read stuff like that, it always gives me a pang of guilt because I know that Dickens inspires that in people, and he doesn't inspire it in me. And I'm just waiting for that penny to drop. I'm waiting... But I've been waiting for a long time, so I don't think it's going to happen. I've been waiting to suddenly get why Dickens has this effect on people. It's my whole life, and not just my life, of course, a century before my life. Ample written records of the fact that this is true. This phenomenon is true. It cannot be that all of those people are wrong. It must be that somehow or other it's not doing it for me. I've searched my memory, trying to figure out if maybe it was pedagogical, maybe if a teacher of first impression, something like that. I can't figure it out, but it always makes me a little guilty. And then there was a jab in the letters column about something that I think I missed. I think it was one of those book reviews that I didn't get. And this is a letter. The writer writes, Rilke advised the young poet not to get involved with reviews. Perhaps Ben Lerner will take that advice after being urgently one-upped and word-smothered by Garth Risk Halberg's review of his novel, The Topeka School. I don't remember I don't think I read... Did I read that? I read The Topeka School, of course, and I read Garth Risk Halberg's City on Fire. But I don't remember the review being word-smothering. That's a jab at Halberg, not at Ben Lerner. Then there's a by the book section where the book review talks with a celebrity about their books. In this case, it's Elton John, and it turns out Elton John says that I tend to gravitate towards nonfiction, biographies, memoirs, autobiographies. And when they ask him which writers working today do you most admire, he says, I was going to say Toni Morrison, but obviously she just died. Antonia Fraser and Simon Sebag Montefiore, both historical biographers. Antonia Fraser's biography of Marie Antoinette is magnificent. I love the details she digs out. And Simon Sebag Montefiore is just a brilliant writer. His book on the Romanovs is incredible. Every time he has a book out, I always rush to get it. How wonderful. How wonderful. But I love how they ask him, have any books influenced your artistic development as a songwriter or a musician? And he says, no. No, not at all. Good for him. Then there's a crime column by Marilyn Stasio. Then we get to a couple of big things. Abby Phillip reviews Tough Love, Susan Rice's new book about her life and about her time in the Obama White House. And the book was kind of non-committal, and the review is actually also kind of non-committal. Jonathan Chait reviews James Stewart's book Deep State, and has an infuriating aside on former FBI Director James Comey. Those of you who are not all that up on American politics might not recognize that name, but he's the reason we have Donald Trump as president, and that's a lot to lay at someone's feet. And there's dodging around that question, almost always, especially the closer you are to the circles of power in Washington. Like, for instance, Chait writes, the pressure drove Comey to make two fateful decisions. First, when he announced that the Bureau was not bringing charges against Hillary Clinton, he denounced her, quote, extremely careless behavior as a kind of middle course between what the law dictated and what Republicans demanded. Second, when an unrelated investigation into sex crimes by the former Democratic Congressman Anthony Weiner turned up more Clinton emails 11 days before the election, Comey felt trapped into announcing that he had reopened the investigation. Stewart shows how Comey violated the FBI's norm of doing absolutely everything possible to avoid involving itself in election campaigns, especially at the end. He, that is Comey, believed that failing to intervene would lead conservative agents to leak the story and would result in his own impeachment by the Republican Congress after the election. As a result, Comey told his staff he needed to publicly reopen the investigation lest he create corrosive doubt that you had engineered a cover-up to protect a particular political candidate. And that is not true. There is no element of that summary that is true. That is James Comey's summary. And it is not true. The reason why he did what he did was not to protect his agents from the possibility of them being accused of covering up the scandal of a candidate, because there was not the slightest shred of evidence to that effect. Comey knew when he was looking at the evidence of Weiner's emails that there was nothing that damned Hillary Clinton in the whole thing. He knew before he went public that no subsequent examination of that evidence, but even by his political enemies, could bring up anything impeachable or negative. That if you lay it out, it's immaterial to Hillary Clinton's presidency. The reason why he got in front of camera 11 days before the election was decided is because he was hungry for the limelight, and he refuses to admit that. And it had catastrophic effects. It got Donald Trump elected. So that I don't know why. I understand why you would soft pedal, but why a writer would do that, much less a reviewer. I just don't know. And the same thing happens. Peter Baker, who's the chief White House correspondent for the Times, reviews Tom LoBianco's book Piety and Power about Mike Pence's political career and his time as Donald Trump's vice president. And it's the same thing all over again. Tom LoBianco asks all the right questions in Piety and Power, his crisp and engaging biography of the vice president, but the answers remain elusive. As a reporter in Indiana, LoBianco covered Pence's rise for the Associated Press and the Indianapolis Star. He tells us of a boy from a plain Midwestern upbringing who explored the intersection of faith and politics and became a radio host, congressman, and governor. But LoBianco is left, along with the rest of us, to wonder at the interior life that Pence guards so zealously. And that is weird. It is weird to summarize Mike Pence that way. It almost sounds like both Peter Baker and Tom LoBianco looked hard at Pence and came up with the idea of a guy who is a fervent believer in evangelical Christianity, but still wants to be in politics as a source for sort of befuddled good. Pence's time in Indiana as governor is a long chronicle of very conscious and absolutely eye-popping evil. And whether or not Peter Baker knows that, he must, Tom LoBianco certainly knows it. The things that Mike Pence did as governor of Indiana are unbelievable. They are beyond the pale. Even in vicious partisan politics, they are unbelievably barbaric, savage. And I didn't detect any of that in Piety and Power, and I don't detect any of it in this review, and I don't know why that is. I mean, if this is what our very first, earliest accounts of all of this stuff reads like, then how sanded down and anodyne are the accounts going to be in 100 years? If the people who were on the ground and knew all the horror stories of Mike Pence as governor are willing to soft pedal it that way, then anyway, we saw the book Unfollow about Megan Phelps Roper, who got out of the Westboro Baptist Church. We saw her book, and I read it. I thought it was quite good. And here it gets a full-page review by Ruth Padawar. That's very good. A very good, very interesting review. And there's a half-page review by Reza Brooks on Call Sign Chaos, the memoir of General Mathis, which is not selling. No one's really interested in it because he made it clear in his press tours about the book that he wasn't going to talk about his time in Donald Trump's administration. And that's all people want to read about, especially since his decision not to talk about a sitting president is, I won't call it treasonous, but it is an enormous black mark at the end of a long career serving the United States for you not to do that. It's one thing if the president's doing things you don't like or is a member of a political party that you're not all that enamored of or whatnot. If the president is breaking the law, then you speak. Then the traditional time-honored U.S. military reticence about the commander-in-chief goes out the window. If the commander-in-chief is doing something criminal and you're watching him do it, he's ordering you to do it and you're telling him not to and resigning over it, then you don't owe him silence anymore, any more than General Mathis on the battlefield. If he had given any legal order to a subordinate, that subordinate is allowed to disobey that order and talk about it to the press. And it's not only allowed, but sort of duty bound. That's a little frustrating. But that was basically, I think that was basically the it as far as I mean the front page about this book, Self Portrait in Black and White, jumps to a full page in the back, and the full page in the back. It's revealed that Thomas Chatterton Williams writes for the Times. And it bothers me a little. I mean, not that you would review his. I mean, he has a new book, and it appears to impress Andrew Solomon, who's a very good reader. So, I'm not saying it doesn't deserve a review, but to give it the full length red carpet treatment, the front page, a full page jump for one of your own writers, something about that bugs me. Something about that bugs me. But then we move on to there's a wrap up of YA. There are the bestseller lists, and that does it for the review for this time around. I always think this is a bad idea. I don't like this at all. The back page of the New York Times Book Review is nowadays given over to an illustration. We're surrounded, we're buried in books, just buried in them. Even watching this channel, which is just one tiny fraction of what's out there, gives you that impression. We're buried in books. So if you have a pull-out book review section for the foremost journalistic organ anywhere in the world, every inch of it should be devoted to books. I understand you want to put bestseller lists in there. A lot of the book industry depends on those bestseller lists. But you have a whole back page. Put something in there that's book-related, not an illustration. But this is an illustration. It's an illustration by Lucy Knisley, and it's called Coffee Shop, Words Everywhere, and it is kind of clever. It's little excerpts of all the stuff that all the people at the coffee shop are reading, and all the different ways they're reading it, books and screens and tablets and whatnot. It's kind of nice. I chuckled for a minute, but I would much rather have read something. I'd much rather have, I mean, that back page there could easily be a bookish column by somebody. Get somebody in the book world to do a column. I'd put myself forward, but I'm well off their radar. There are plenty of people who aren't. Float the idea, or even make a column with a rotating writer that's book-related. More words is what I'm saying, not less. Don't give us a picture. But anyway, that is yesterday's news for you. It's plus lots and lots of digressions. So I'm going to wrap this up. I don't know what this was, but I didn't want to let the Sunday Times go. A lot of you said you like that. And another thing that a lot of you like that I mean to get back to is Entertainment Weekly. I keep meaning to do that. I keep meaning to go back to that. I just haven't done it. But this channel is full of good intentions. So I'll wrap this up for now. But I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.